Hey there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Derek. This is Chocolate City Tech. If this is your first time, welcome. Um, in this episode, we're going to be finishing off our authentication piece. We're finally going to get Sapper connected with .NET Core. He's going to be able to log in, log out. We're going to be issuing tokens. We're also going to make use of our refresh tokens as well. We're going to be combining all of that with the Node.js application that's obviously on the front end for Sapper. And what I'll do is I'll also show you if you're using just Svelte without Sapper, then your case is even simpler. That means by the time you're actually done somewhere in the middle, you're done. You don't even have to keep going. But for those who continue using Sapper or any other server-side framework, you want to follow along so that you can, learn how to do that piece as well. So if you haven't liked this series, you haven't subscribed to this channel, you haven't shared this with people, make sure you do because we put out a lot of content. I try to put out new content every 2 weeks or so. So definitely subscribe so that you can get notification when a new episode comes out. This episode is going to be probably the last of the long episodes because it's going to be a lot of coding. I'm going to take you from the beginning, and from the beginning I mean from the beginning of this authentication piece to the end. So when you're done, you have a framework that you can use going forward. So again, if you haven't liked this, subscribe. If you have any questions during when I'm going through this stuff, hit me up. I usually reply within a few hours or something like that. So let's get right into the code. All right. So as I said in the beginning, we're going to be doing a lot of code. So right now, if you're looking for the GitHub, all the code is going to be available on GitHub, specifically at this URL here. So as you can see, this is the .NET 5 dash Svelte.js. For each of the episodes that we go through, there will be a branch for it. Currently, this branch that we're working on here is going to be branch number part 7. So when this episode is done, look for part 7 to be added here. All right, so let's take a look at where we are in terms of the code. So last time we met, we connected our Svelte.js with our now, you might hear me saying Svelte, but really the application itself is built on the framework Sapper. And I went over that last episode, and I also went over the reason why we're using Sapper. So if you want to take a look at that, that's going to be very helpful. In fact, you probably want to go through some of the series that we went through so far. So yes, I'm here, and npm run dev. All right, so our application is running on port 3001. Now let's bring up our .NET Core API. Let's run that as well. All right, that's also up and working. And we can try out our Swagger. Everything works just fine as we expect it to work. All right, there you go. So this is our application. So far, we have a few pages. We have an about page. We have a blog. We can navigate to these blogs, and all these are hitting our API backend. So everything is working as we expect it to work. All right, so that's great. So let's go ahead and get going with the authentication piece. All right, so to give you a brief understanding of what it is that we're doing here. So let's take a look at this presentation real quick. I promise it's only going to be 3 pages long. So only 3 slides. So this is the sumsite.com is going to be our API authentication, right? Right now what we have is we have a single page application, which means that we have a browser that sits here. Now the browser could sit on the same server, but it doesn't have to. It could sit somewhere else could sit on the same server on a different port. Doesn't really matter. What we're going to do is we're going to send a username and password to our API. Our API checks the information. Everything is good. Sends back a JWT token. Brings it back to the browser. The browser is then going to store this in a session state. You can use cookies or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Then after that, what happens is that every time we send a request to get something here, so let's say we send a request to go get secret or go to API/blogs, API/whatever. What we're going to do is we're going to take that bearer token, so we're going to call it, and we're going to add it to our headers, and we're going to send that over to our API. Our API will then check it. Now, this isn't something we have to write code to do because we already told in the startup of application, one of the previous videos, that's how we want to authenticate users, by using JWT bearer tokens, right? So we'll send that over there. Our application will take a look at it and say, oh, okay, that's good. It's good enough. All right. You can have API/blogs, whatever resources here, and we're done. That's how easy it is to do single page app authentication. Problem is, that's not what we're doing. So what we are actually doing is we're doing server-side rendering, which means that we don't just have a browser, we also have a node server. That means we have an entire application here, so a front end and a back end as well, all built into one, right? So the problem is that when we did what we just finished doing, that means that the browser is authenticated. That means anytime a user clicks a button to maybe request for something that doesn't go to the node server but goes directly to the API, well, that's great because we store all the we store the token here, so we can still go and grab the token and send it, and we'll be good. Now you could actually keep doing that with Sapper. The only problem is that you will never make any authenticated calls while doing server-side rendering. What I mean by that is that you will always wait for the application to load, for the browser to become available before you actually make a request out to the API. And that's not that, that's not going to be great. You land on the page, you get to the about page, but the about page isn't really loaded yet because this information doesn't get here yet, right? It waits till everything loads and then you make the call to your API backend. But if you end up doing that, then why bother using server-side rendering? You might as well just go ahead and just use Svelte by itself without Sapper. All right, so we're not going to be doing that. The other path that you can take is what you can do is you can authenticate just the node server, right? And that's a very real possibility. That's actually a good working solution, believe it or not. So in that scenario, what will happen is that when the user clicks, sign in or whatever, it won't go directly to the same site. Instead, what it will do is it will go to the node server. The node server would then proxy that request to the API, .NET Core API. The .NET Core API will then return the token, but it will return the token not to the browser. It will return the token to the node server. The node server then saves that token, and then anytime you want to make a call, whenever you have to click something in the browser, you have to go through the node server, and basically you proxy in the request, and that's a very real thing. You can use that as a solution. The only problem with that solution is that every call has to be proxied, right? And that may not really work out for your scenario. Because of that, I'm going to show the two ways that you can. I'm going to show you the way to do it where you can make use of both scenarios, where you can have your browser be authenticated and your node server authenticated. All right, so what does that look like? Well, that one is a little more complex, and that's what we're going to be working on today. So like I said, strap in, get a big cup of coffee or whatever it is that you drink, because this is going to take a lot. So what we're going to do is we're going to send out a request from the browser. We're going to proxy that request to the node server, right? The node server is then going to send a request to our API. The API gets the information that says, okay, person is good, returns back a JWT token. The JWT token goes to our node server. Our node server is going to save that into session. So we're actually going to have a session based authentication on our node server end. The node server is then going to share that session with the browser through a session object that Sapper provides, which is going to be, which is actually pretty slick. So we're going to be able to add that information to the node server, and that node server is then going to share that information with the browser whenever the page loads. So this way, what you can do then is we will be able to make authenticated calls, not just from the browser, but also through our node server. And this is the best solution. Obviously, this also takes a lot more time, but that's what we're here for. So let's go ahead and jump in on that. All right, so here we are back in the application. As you recall, these are all the only routes that we have. So let's go ahead and add a route for login. So I'll make a folder called login, Inside that folder, make a file called index.svelte. You want to make another file called index.jx. Now, if you don't know what these are, well, first of all, I'll probably explain a little bit, but also you can go take a look at a previous video. We went in depth on the previous video about, how this navigation works, this file-based navigation works. So just make sure everything is working. Just put a div in here. This is login page. Save that. Let's go check and make sure it's up and running. Of course, we haven't added a link for it, so we're not going to see that yet. But all right, so it's working. This is login page. As you can see, this thing is fast. All right, so let's go and remedy that. Let's actually add a link nav. And for now, we'll just copy and just add it here. Go to login, copy that, make it login, and once again, login. And of course, that's here. Go to blogs, go to here, back, login. That all works. That's nice. So for the login page, I probably want I want a form, obviously, but I'm going to wrap that form in just wrap it in a card. And it would take probably the simplest looking card that we can see here. I got a link that card with a body. That's all we need. We don't need any images and nothing, so card with a body will work. All right, so login.svelte. Take this part out. That goes to login, and don't need any of that. Actually, before the login, the card, and before we go ahead add in all this stuff in for the bootstrap, let's actually add the bootstrap CDN. So back to the website, get bootstrap. Let's copy the CDN. We only need the CSS, so just grab the CSS. And we're going to add that to the template. And just throw that in here somewhere. So back in our login here, let's put in let's go ahead and put a div. Let's call this row. And row should have a small 8. Let's grab that and throw that in here. So what do we want in the card body? Obviously, we want space for username and password and stuff like that. So let's throw that in. All right, so we want a form. We're not going to need a action, but we are going to need an onSubmit. Event default. This one of those nice little things in Svelte that I really like. These little helper. Let's call the function handle submit. Submit. And of course, we want to actually make the. So let's put a script tag at the top. Let's make a async function. Call it handle. Submit. All right. So we got our form needs 2 fields. So let's put a label. Label is for input username. Input type. What class is going to be? form control. And these are all Bootstrap classes. If you're not familiar with Bootstrap, well, this isn't a Bootstrap tutorial, but it's been around for ever. Or it seems like forever. Input, we'll call the ID. We'll just name the ID username. Maybe placeholder here. Just be username. Now the part that's we're going to be doing the magic. And before I do that, let me actually put those variables up top here. So let user name equals empty string. Let password equals empty string. So the way for Svelte to bind any values here and input to the variables that we have up top is to literally use bind, which can't go wrong with that, right? It's called bind value. So and then just give it the value that you want to bind to. In this case, we want to obviously bind to the username, and that should do it for that. So what we want to do is just copy this and make another version here for the password. So password. Now for type here, you do want to use password. That's the type. And just go ahead and copy that. And for placeholder, we're not really going to put any placeholder for password. And of course, password here. And we want to put a button. So button, submit. What is it going to be called? Submit or login. Okay. Let's make that a capital L. Fold this in a little bit. All right, so this probably put some class on here. So another thing I like about Svelte here is I don't have to put, remember to put class, capital N name. It's pretty cool for that. Button BTN, let's call this BTN primary, and this would just be the blue one. All right, so login, what we got here? Card body. We didn't even put a card title. We don't really need that. All right, that's good. Let's go and take a look at it, see what it looks like. Actually, before I do that, let me actually log. So console.log username, password. All right, so that's fine. All right, let's put a little margin up on this one here. We're not here for the pretty part, but it's okay to just put a little bit of margin top on that. Save that. It's just a little bit better. All right, so if I click that, inspect elements. Perfect. All right, password. All right, that is beautiful. Let's go ahead and make the connection. All right, so what we have here now is a form. All we need to do is submit this form. So let's go ahead and create a submit form, an actual submit. So if you do constant response equals fetch, and we're just going to hard code that API route, which we should have somewhere in here. Not that one, but in the, yep, we hard code that bad boy here. Let's grab this piece of it. Bring it back to the login page and put that. Of course, we're going to change the route because it's going to be going to the accounts. So what do we need? We need to tell fetch API what kind of method this is. So there's going to be a post method. So it's not just going to be a post method. It's also going to be a post method that has headers, right? So what kind of headers? We want to accept application JSON. We want a content type, should be the same. So let me copy that piece. Yeah, that's all for the headers. We want body, which is obviously the request that we send it over. So in this case, it's going to be JSON.stringify. And then here you just pass in the body that you want to send out. Obviously, in our case, the body is going to be username and password. And we also want to let our API know that we are including our credentials here. So credentials include, and don't forget your comment piece right there. So blah blah, this is async, so we will go ahead and await. And if response dot status equals 200, then what we'll do is just console.log. Actually, let me get the oops, constant result equals response.json. Eventually, we're going to get tired of writing all these hard coding all these pieces, so we'll end up making an API, a generic API. So else do what? Else maybe show an error. So let's do let errors equals maybe just an empty string. I mean an empty an array. And maybe later on we might show more than one error. So in this case, we'll just do errors dot push failed to authenticate. Or maybe we just do username and or password is invalid. And we'll put that down here somewhere, maybe above here or maybe below here. So in this case, we probably want to do a for each. All right, I keep typing that. Oh, thank you, IntelliSense. For each errors as error. And we'll probably do a bootstrap alert. So let's do a paragraph alert, and what's that? I believe it's alert danger. And just put the error here. Let me double check, and I believe it's danger. Warning, danger, one of those. Alert. Danger. Perfect. All right, so we got that. Loop through that. If one of these, then, do that. Maybe because I'm always scared of nulls, what I'll do is I'll wrap this in a if errors and errors dot length, because errors is going to be, we instantiate errors as a an empty array, so it's always going to be errors, right? So let's go ahead and grab this, put that in there, and let the formatting begin. All right. Let's see, what else do I want to put on this page here before we move on? All right, let's put a header for this page. So we will do svelte. Nope, head. And what's the head name? We're going to put in the head, we're going to put a title, and we'll just call it login. And of course, exotic rental. And what this is going to do is it's going to place that right over here. All right, so right up top, which is pretty sweet. All right, so we are almost ready to send this to our API. And let's do console.log the result so we can see when it comes back. That's good enough. Let's go to our API, make sure that it is ready to receive. So not the authentication service, but accounts controller. So if you recall previously, we have an authenticate. This model takes a username and a password. And if it's valid, it goes through the process, authenticates the user. And if it's invalid, obviously returns a bad request. Or we can turn this to unauthenticated. And what we're going to do here is, instead of sending back the refresh token and sending all that stuff, we're going to take this out and we're going to return the actual object, which, if you remember, this object here contains the token, the refresh token, and it's authenticated. All right, so let's run that. Let's go take a look at our password from previously done work, which is the user name is test user and the password is secrets123. That is perfect. All right, let's go. All right, let's take a look here. So we can see that the request came through. We have secret. Step through, obviously, will be authenticated. And as a result, we're going to get back this. Can remove this now. All right. So the request went. It looks like it came back. We say it's fulfilled. That means everything worked. The only reason why it's not spitting out the stuff is because I'm actually logging the result and not the awaited result. So let's go change that real quick. So waits that. And let's try the request one more time. So we have a test user and password. Look at that. Now that's beautiful. All right. So if you were doing Svelte without Sapper, you are pretty much done at this point. You can call it quits. If you're not doing server-side rendering, then you are done. Because all you have to do at this point is take this token and maybe the refresh token as well, and just save it in session. So you can save it in session storage, or you can save it in a local. Well, don't save it in a local storage because you want when the user closes the browser, you want it to disappear. So save it in the session storage, and you're actually done. So if you were doing single page app, this is all you need to do. For our scenario though, that it's a little more difficult than that. So let's go ahead and add that piece in. All right, so go ahead and kill your server, because we're going to need some npm packages in order for this to work. All right, to make things a little more clear, what I've done is pull up my terminal here, but as you can see, it's still pretty much the same thing. I'm still in the same route. So all right, so let's go ahead and install our first package. Npm install dot. We're going to make use of our environment variables, so we need this package. So go ahead and install that. We are also going to need possibly body-parser. Body-parser. I don't think we're not going to be using cookies. So all right, so you need a npm install body-parser. We're going to need, for the session that we're going to be using, we need to install express session. With a session, we need a place to store it. We are going to be using file storage. Nope, can't install by itself. npm install. And because we're going to be making requests on our node server, we can't just use the browser's fetch, so we need node fetch. So go ahead and grab that. And that's perfect. All right. Now the reason I chose to use this session means is basically looking at the documentation from Sapper. This was their recommendation. All right. So if you go to Sapper, look at this documentation here, specifically Sapper session data. This is the recommended way to keep session between the server and also the client side. So that's what we're going to be doing. I also took a look at this GitHub called Real World. So it shows you how to basically do authentication both server side and also with the browser as well. And as you can see, it's from the contributors are here from the creators of the framework. So definitely take a look at this. It's going to be helpful. At least it helped me anyway. So, all right. So we have everything that we need. So let's go and start up in the server.js. So the first thing we want to do is let's actually go ahead, collapse this a little bit. Let me show I'm here. All right. And in here, I want to, at the root level, I want to create a .env file. So .env. And there are a few things I want to be able to, use over and over in my env file. So I want to reuse the API endpoint. So let's go ahead and add that. And as you recall, the endpoint is TCP and API. I'm also going to store some secrets for the session. And here, all it needs is just a long string. So let me grab some fake long string from somewhere here. So I just go into this SHA-256 hash generator here. So just type in some stuff. This is a secret. That's good enough. All right, paste that in there. Should be good to go. Save that. And to be able to use this, you want to make sure you pull it as your first item here. Just so let's require it. So first thing we want to do is we want to make sure we bring in the config. So bring in config, and we do that by just require the package we just brought in, just .m. So now we want to go ahead and grab some of the stuff that we need. So we need to import body-parser that we downloaded from obviously body-parser. Thank you, IntelliSense. We need a session. So let's require a session. Express session, that is. And this is how we're going to store this. We're going to store it as a file. So require store. There it is. Pass it in session object. So what's going to happen is that when the user logs in, it's going to create a file here called session. And you can update that and make changes and give it different configurations as to where you want it to live, but and stuff like that. So previously we added this here. Now we want to bring in some of the stuff that we just grabbed from here. So we want to bring in some of the stuff that we just created. So we want API endpoint. Let's grab that. We also want session secret. Let's grab that as well. All right. All right, now let's start making use of some of these things. So let's use body-parser. .json. Let's use session. And if you're wondering how I would know, so if you're using VS Code, as you definitely should, you can see that there's a whole bunch of configs that you can add here. And if you have any questions, I mean, just literally, you can just read through this. Let's get back to our work. So in session, we need to give it a store as you just saw a second ago. So what kind of store is it going to be? It's going to be this store. So new, what's our secret going to be? Right? It's going to be this secret, right? Session secret. And again, you can go through some of these. We want to be saved. Yes. What kind of cookie you want to use? It's going to be true. And the kind of settings that we're going to have for this cookie. We'll probably just put the time we want to expire. So we will say 1000+60. Let's give us seconds, and then now we can decide on how many minutes, and probably just do 60 minutes. So let it expire in an hour. Should be good enough. Now, this Sapper session middleware, if you recall. All right, so if you go back and look in the docs as we just saw a few minutes ago, so the recommended way was to use express session, and also to use the this way of passing session around. All right, so seed in session is what you're looking for if you need more information on how this works. All right, so let's get back to our code. So based on the code that we just saw, what we need to do is we need to return the object. And what we need here is just return, in our case, it's going to be a user. We'll call it a user object. Before we do that though, what I want to do is I probably want to, just for my own sanity, I'm going to log. So if I save session and queries.session.user console.log add in user to session, and that's good enough. And then now we can actually return. We want to reuse this API endpoint in places, so I'm going to add it to this. So if user.session, then bring me that session user. Otherwise, it'll just be null. That is all we actually need here. So we are good to go. Go ahead and save that. Let's get back to our index file. All right, so in our login, currently what we're doing is we logging in, passing this here. We want to stop doing that, right? What we want to do is we want to pass this through our node server first before it goes there. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to remove this from here. First of all, we no longer need this. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using our server routes. So I explained this in the last video. So if you need more info, just go back and check that out, because I don't want this video to be too long. But in a nutshell, we have a login. There's an index file here. That's the index.spelt. That means that whenever we have any fetch that corresponds to an HTTP method of the same name in this index file, that is what's going to be applied. So in this case, we are just going to login. All right, so make that a /login. All right, so that means now we need to have a post method in here. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So we need to export an async function that is named the same as an HTTP method, in this case a post, and it always takes a request, a response, and a nest. And we'll do a try catch on this bad boy here, and console.error. And let's grab some things that we need. So to log in, we need obviously the API endpoint. And by now you asking yourself, how are you going to get this API endpoint? This is where hopefully everything will start to click if you didn't already understand it yet. So when we created this session object and we passed in the request object, what Sapper is doing is that it's making this available to us. So when we go back to our index file here and we look at this request object, it's going to have those things on there. So that's how you share state in a sense. All right, so what else do we need? We don't need anything else because we won't be authenticated yet. So we can grab that from that request.session. The alternative here is that since we also have this in, if you go back here, since we also have this in our process.environment, we can actually just grab it here as well. So 2 ways to skin this cat. So we can grab it this way as well. And constant, oh, don't want that. Constant data equals await the fetch. Now, I know I'm going to be using this sort of process over and over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder, not a routes. I'm just going to create a folder called utils. And in utils, I'm going to create an API. So let's call that API.js. And we're going to export an async function called, it's called a create request. Because it's going to be generic, we want to try to account for all the things that we probably want to always pass in, right? So we are always going to need to know the method. We are always going to need to know if there's some kind of token being passed, because we do need a token to be passed. What else? We would also like to know the route that this is going to, right? So route path. And we can take in the options object. All right, so one of the first things that we need to know is like, what kind of request is this? Is this a browser request or is this a server-side request? So let's take a look and see what it is. So we'll say process.browser. So the kind of fetch we're going to use is dependent on whether we are using a if this is a browser or not. So if it's browser, then we'll just use browser's fetch, right? So that means window will be available here. So window.browser. Otherwise, you're going to use node fetch. So require node fetch and grab default. All right, now let's start building up our options object. So let options opt equals an empty object. And actually, before we do that, let's do it this way. Let it equal empty object, and then what we'll do is we'll assign it. So object.assign this empty object options. All right, so now I can already have all the things it needs in it. So for some reason, if options here doesn't have headers, then we definitely want to make sure we add headers. And usually we are always going to need accept. Application JSON. And content type is always going to be in our scenario. Oh, come on. Guess I could have just copied that, right? Application JSON. All right. By default, we can also include credentials. So, and now we won't do that. We'll just leave that to the post. Obviously, we want to assign the method. If a user passes in a token, we will assume this is an authentication token. So that goes in the application, and it's going to go in as a bearer token. Now it's very important that you need to make sure that's the backtick, because we're doing string interpolation. So you want to make sure that there is a space here, so don't forget that. Also, if they pass in a body, so should we let the options be included here, right, as we're doing in this case? Should we now gonna pass that here? That's not gonna be part of the options. We'll just let the user pass in everything they need to pass in. So if you pass in options, then the option is going to be all those things. So really, the only thing we need is the, in fact, we don't even need the method here, because the method is going to be part of the options here. The only thing we need is if you pass in a token, then we grab the token. Then we should make this the most important piece, the route path. So route path, possible token, and options here. I think that's all we need to send out. And to check out sanity, what we do is we'll add a console log here somewhere, and just say making request, and then let's just put in the route path. Constant response equals await route path and options. All right, cool. All right, so let's go ahead and do something with a response. So ground status equals 200. Then just unwrap it. Like I said, I'll probably make a switch statement later on, but for now, it's just going to be response.status and response that. For 201 and 204, this would be our creating updates and deletes. We'll just return true. Else return false or null or something. Perfect. All right, so let's go make use of this get request. Save that. All right, what else do we need? We need the request object itself. So constant request equals, it takes a route path, and the route path is just going to be the API endpoint plus that counts. That's 2 C's right there. And it takes an options, right? Because if we go back to our API, that's good. API takes a route path, it takes a token, a refresh token, and options. And inside the options, we can provide the method and all those things. So, all right, so back to our job here. So the method is post, of course. And here we do need to provide a body. We can just stringify that. Another way to do this is to just put the body part in the API JS instead of doing it here, but this is fine. We can get the body of a request.body, and what else we need? I believe that is all we need. Actually, since this is a included, let's include a credentials. So credentials include, and I believe that is it. All right, so now constant data equals await create request, passing in the request object. If data, we will return the data, else it will say things fail. All right, let me just handle that section first. So we will return a status code of 41 and response.end. So if data, what we want to do is we want to save data to that session object that we created. So session dot user equals data, and then we can set the header. So response dot set header, and it's just going to be a content type. Oops. And of course that's application.json. And we'll end that by sending the what we actually receive from our API. So stringify data. That's it. Save. All right, so everything is pretty much the same here. So there's a username, there's a password, errors. So call is going to be still the same. Response that comes back should be, if it's status 200, like we just said, we'll unwrap that and console log it. Actually, we're not going to console log anymore. We're actually going to make this then do what it's supposed to be doing. So let's go handle that. All right, we need to make this a little bit easier on the client. So when a person is submitting, we want to make sure we hold off on, we disable the button. So let's call it it's loading, or it's not really loading, it's more like it's submitting. Submitting equals false. So as soon as we go in here to submit, we want to set this to true. And then once we come back, after we do the await and come back, we want to set that to false. Whether we passed or not doesn't really matter, right? So, and of course, yeah. So whether we pass or not, we want to make sure that that gets handled. And we want to pass that down here somewhere. Where's our button here? That is. Thought I folded this button down. Maybe I. And disable. Yes. Disable it if it's submitting. All right. That covers that piece. When we come back, if this is successful, we don't want to stay here, right? We want to route to somewhere else. So let's route to a dashboard, which has not yet been created. So href and dashboard. Cool. All right, so let's open up our routes. Let's add a route, call it dashboard. In the dashboard, let's add a index.js. Excuse me, index.svelte. And here we're going to do something a little bit different. So the first script tag that we're going to put is actually a, it's going to have a context of module, not content. And what this means is that this is going to be a script that is run both in the server, both on the server, I mean, and on the client side as well. And what you need to do is you need to export in a function. In this case, it will be an async function. Doesn't have to be. export a function called preload. And what's going to happen is that Sapper is going to run this off. I pretty much sort of explained this in the previous session, but so it takes a page and a session. Now, reality is we don't really need all the session. In the session, the only thing we're looking for here is the user. So let's just grab that piece out. So we'll say that if there is no user, then clearly you're not supposed to be here, right? You're not authenticated. So then what we'll do is we call a redirect, and we'll redirect you to the login page where you can go log in. If you do exist, then what we do is we return the user object. And what that's going to do is it's going to make this user object available in this bottom script. This bottom script is going to be run on the server, excuse me, on the browser. So what we would do is we just export this user here. So let user. All right, and to make use of, I think I might use the session object here. So stores go to. I'm actually going to use go to. Probably not. All right, so we're going to grab the store object from Sapper. So that's going to be Sapper/app. And don't need that piece there, comma. And to make use of it, we just say session equals stores. And that gives you access to the stores. And we're not really going to do too much for now. For now, we'll just do a div and say that if the user is here, if user, then row. And I even didn't have to do this. I could have actually just used session user. But that's fine. Actually, you know what? Let's do that instead. In this case, you don't actually need to pass the user. Nor do we need this piece. So then what we do is if session, if $session.user. And then we'll just spit out all the info that comes back for that user. So in this case, it's just going to be JSON.stringify $session user. All right, that's good enough. Of course, it would be nice to also do something similar in our nav. Actually, before I do this, let me copy this piece right here. And let's go put that in login as well. So if a user comes in here, the user is already authenticated. There's no need to put this user in here, right? So we can send this user straight to the dashboard. So in this case, if user, then send user straight to dashboard. All right, so let's go to our nav. So what we're going to do here in nav is that we're going to do something similar. Right now, we're just showing a bunch of pages without really any sort of regards to whether the person is logged in or not. So we want to modify that. All right, back in the nav.svelte, what we're going to do is we're going to set it up so that when the user is in session, that they no longer see the login page. They're only going to see a login, excuse me, not a login page, but a login link. That they're only going to see the login link and maybe a dashboard that we can redirect them to. So let's go ahead and put that in. So in Svelte, there's the idea of stores, and Sapper makes use of this. So let's go ahead and import stores. And you get that from Sapper.app. Just make sure you remove that extra thing there that my editor put in. And we want to grab the sessions. So cons session, grab it from the stores, and now we have access to the sessions object. So what we want to do here is that if the user is logged in, so let's put that in. Let's bring in the if statement, and might as well put in a else. So if $session.user, then we should have an about, we should have a logout page, right? Or a logout link. Keep saying page. And we also want to have a dashboard that it can see. Else, we want to show the user a login. And let's remove this here for now. All right, so with our logout link created, let's go ahead and create a logout page. So from here on routes, just add a file. You don't have to add a folder because I don't think you're going to put anything else in here. So let's go logout.svelte. Gotta make sure it's spelled right. And what we're going to do here is, all right, first thing I want to do is I want to put up a script tag. And this is going to be a script of context of module. This is going to be a module. Oh my goodness. All right, so what we want to do is export. As you saw before, you can export a preload function, and that function will be executed. So export async function preload. And as I mentioned before, it takes a page and session. And here, what we really care about is the user. So we can just grab that. So if there's a user when you arrive here, then we want to do a logout. If there is no user, as I mentioned before, we don't want you just logging out someone. So what we'll do is we'll await this fetch and the URL that we're going to fetch on. I'll put that in a minute. So what do we need? We need to tell the method we're going to use, which is going to be a post method. Headers, our usual content type. And of course, that's going to be application JSON. All right, so that's almost it. All right, so for our routes, what we're going to be doing is, as you notice, I didn't create a folder level. So that means that I'm not going to have a routes version of this, right? I'm not going to have a server route for this one. Well, let me take that back. I'm going to have a server route, but it's not going to be server route that's labeled the same way we've been doing before. So in this case, we're going to make another folder. We're going to call it auth. In this case, we're going to call this one logout. So what you're going to do is you want to come here, add folder. This folder is going to be called auth. Inside this folder is where we're going to put in a logout. All right. So what's going to happen is it's going to go, this route is going to go here, route logout, and inside of logout is going to look for a post method. So that's another way of doing this server route. It doesn't always have to be dashboarded and index and all that kind of stuff. So, all right. So in this case, it's logout.js. In logout.js, we're going to import our create request from my API. Excuse me. That's in the utils. and it's called API. And we, like I mentioned, we need to export a post function. As usual, it takes in a request, a response, there's a nest. And let's just put a try catch on this bad boy. Console.error, whatever that error is. All right, so what do we need? First of all, we need our API endpoint. So let's go ahead and grab that. Wait, that's just API endpoint. You grab that from process.environment. We need our user from session. User is going to be on request.session. And of course, you want to do equal here if you actually want it to work. If you don't know what to work, then of course, don't worry about that. All right, so now our request object. So we need a route path. If you recall, in this case, it's going to be the API endpoint plus accounts logout. That's 2 C's there. Looks right. You're going to pass in our options. Here, the method is going to be post because that's what we're going to be sending to our API endpoint. The header, it's going to be our usual. Might as well just go ahead and copy one from here. So content type application JSON. And of course, we also accept application JSON as well. And I don't like the inconsistency here, so make that a single quote. All right, that is much better. Now, one thing that makes this one a little bit different from some of the other stuff that we've done is that in this scenario, we're not just going to be passing a, we're not just going to make a regular post. We're also going to make sure that we include a token as well as a refresh token because our backend API relies on that to, know that this isn't, just any random person trying to get in, right? All right. So token is going to be on the user token and refresh token. It's going to be on user dot refresh token. IntelliSense, there you go. All right, and then of course we'll await that request. So constant data equals await. Not async. Create request and pass it in the request object, of course. If data, then we'll do stuff. Else, well, we'll also do stuff. Response dot add a status code. Goes for 1. And we're going to end this request. Yeah, very similar patterns, right? If there is data, then of course we want to go ahead and remove the session object. So request.session user, we want to go ahead and delete that. And just with some sanity check here, we'll console log this data, and I don't know what should we say. Oops. Removed session on delete. All right. We're going to set headers as usual. And the header is going to simply be content type of application JSON. So just go ahead and copy this piece. Bring it back down here. Of course, got to do a little differently here. And once again, we'll just end that. All right, and that should complete that piece. All right, let's go ahead and test our login and logout. And it looks like we have two about links. Don't worry, we'll take care of that in a few minutes. All right, so let's get our username and password. And there you go. Looks like we have been redirected to the dashboard, so everything seems to be working. Let's try logging out. That didn't look like it worked. All right, let's go see what the issue is. All right, so I'm looking through here, making requests to accounts. That was the login. It looks like the logout, API accounts logout. That's correct link. Oh, look at that. We put the application as opposed to the authorization. So let's go correct that for the bearer token. So let's correct the headers. For some reason, we also have two duplicated ones here. So let's remove one and change that to authorization. All right, while we're here, we should probably go ahead and remove that second about link. Now, what we also want to do is that when you do log out, we don't want to just show you like a blank screen or something. We want to most likely redirect you back to the home page, so the index page. So let's go ahead and implement that. So we want to make sure we log you out and also send you to another page. So let's go ahead and implement that piece. So we're going to use the go-to redirect you to the dashboard. Oh, excuse me, dashboard to the index page. So what we need here is the sessions from the stores. So it's just cons sessions and we'll set the user to null. So basically what will happen is the user gets to the logout page, the call is made to log out, and what's going to happen is session will be set to null and redirected to the index page. Let's go ahead and go try this. Of course, we don't want you to be able to log out if the user doesn't exist, right? So we want to check here the user does exist before we make this call. All right, so with those done, let's go ahead and try it out from end to end. Look at that. It looks like a page refreshed and the logout is actually getting hit. And I think probably refreshed multiple times because I'm seeing multiple calls coming through here. Anyway, let's continue. Look on the bottom there, you can see it says remove session on delete true. Right, so that means our logout.js was hit right here. Perfect. All right, so let's try it from end to end. Let's begin the process again. Log in. Let's get that password. And we are logged in once again. We have our token, refresh token. It's authenticated. Log out, and that worked just fine. Perfect. All right, so at this point we are almost done. The last thing we want to do is we want to cover refresh tokens. All right, so what we're going to do is if you ever been to a website where after some amount of you log in and then after some time of inactivity, you get a pop-up that comes up and it says, hey, listen, you haven't been active for such and such time. Would you like to keep your session or would you like to log out? And of course you can log out or you can kill your session right away. So essentially that's what we're going to be doing. So our node server is going to be keeping sessions. It's going to be tracking the session for us. So the first thing we're going to do is create a component, and you can call it anything you want. Maybe refresh token, keep alive, something of that nature, or maybe call it track session or something, which sort of makes sense. So track session dot spelt, and of course you always want to spell that right. So let's think about this for a quick second. Essentially, what you want to do is you want to have a way to, when the user logs in, right, you want to start counting. So basically, you need a way to start counting. After counting for a while, if the user hasn't clicked anything, that means they're basically inactive. So you also want to keep track of being able to click on stuff, right? After a certain amount of time, you want to log the user out. Before you log the user out, you want to pop up a modal. When the user pops up in modal, well, not the user, but when the application pops up in modal, you also want to give the user a certain amount of time to respond, right? Because you don't want the modals to just be sitting there forever. So after that certain amount of time of inactivity, you want to go ahead and log the user off if they don't actually respond. But if they do respond and say, log me out, of course you go ahead and do it right away. If they respond and say, nope, I want to keep my session, then of course you want to refresh the token for them. So thinking about that, hopefully that sort of makes sense. So let's go ahead and try to put that into code. So as usual, let's bring in our script tag. We're going to import the stores because we know we're definitely going to be needing that. Because that's where we have our, and that comes from that Sapper app. Okay. And of course, once you do that, you want to grab the session. Equals stores. So as I mentioned, we want to be able to, begin as soon as the user logs in, right? So Sapper has a, well, not just Sapper, but Svelte has a few lifecycle hooks that we want to make use of. So let's go ahead and import them. So you want to use the on mount. So as soon as the application mounts, the component mounts, we want to, start essentially session tracking, right? And then when the component destroys itself, you want to get rid of this so that we don't have memory leak or anything like that. So that comes from, what I keep the equal from Svelte. I don't need that much space now. I was going to write something else, so I made so much space, but so let's put a few timers here. So one time every one is the session time, right? And this could be any time. Obviously, it depends on what it is that you're doing. So for now, we can just say we're going to keep it at 1 minute, just because we're going to test with it. But if you wanted to do, in reality, you probably want to do a little more than 1 minute. So for now, let's do 1 minute. But if you want, you can obviously switch that to 15. So I'll just do this and just leave that there in case you want to play around with that. So basically, after the user has not responded for that amount of time, we want to go ahead and, pop up a modal. So once we pop up the modal, right, the user should be able to respond. So let's call that modal response time. And for now, I would say we're going to give the user maybe, I don't know, 2 minutes or something like that. But once again, because I'm testing, I'm just going to put 1 minute. So in your case, you may want to do ×2. So again, I would just do this. And we want to know, like, how often do we sort of check if the user has sort of clicked somewhere, or if the user hasn't clicked anything, or how often do we check to sort of increment our timer? I would say about 15 or maybe 30 seconds is good enough. So let's call that maybe session idle checkup, and that'll be about 30 seconds. So, and again, you can update all these as you see fit. So let's set up a few variables that we're going to need. So we are going to need the counter itself. So idle counter, and we can just start off at 0, obviously. We also want to be able to show that, know when to show the modal, right? So we need a Boolean. So let show modal equals false for now. And let's see, we're gonna need a timer. So because we want to clean up our intervals and timeouts, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set them to variables so that it can be removed later. So let's call this timeout int. I just set that to null for now. And actually, let me not set that to null because that's deceptive. Let interval int goes -1. All right, so on destroy, actually, let's do this. Function. Let's call it function breakdown or something, where we do all that stuff. So when we break down, we want to set show modal to false. You want to set time or clear timeout, clear interval, and clear timeout by passing the interval. So it's timeout, and all right, it's just a cleanup. Maybe it's probably better to call it cleanup. All right, cool. All right, so on destroy, this is a lifecycle hook that's going to run when component is being destroyed. So we can actually console log component is being destroyed. We will run cleanup. Yeah, we'll run cleanup. On mount. Oops. Come on. So on mount, let's copy this here and say that on mount component is being mounted. Makes sense. And what do we want to do when a component mounts? We want to add an event listener. And essentially we want to listen to clicks, right? So as long as the user is sort of clicking on something, that's fine. You could do other stuff like mouse move and all that stuff, but I don't think that's necessary here. We want to reset the counter. So as soon as they move, we reset the counter so that it never hits 15 minutes. Of course, there's an issue with that, and I'll explain that in a few minutes, but I may leave that as an issue for you to solve. I'll give you some hints, but I think that's something that you can probably resolve. All right, so track session, blah, blah, blah. All right, that's good enough. Let's go, and what else do we need here? We actually need the real function that's going to start things. One thing we want to make sure is that, well, not just make sure, what we want to do is to make sure that when we bring in the session, so if $session.user, so if the user actually begins, then that's when, if there's a session user, that's when we do stuff, right? Because when you land on a page, if there is no user in session, then obviously there's no need for us to even run this code whatsoever. So what are we going to call this code? How about start session tracking? That doesn't exist, so let's go ahead and create that. So function that, here we want to set up our interval. So you will say that interval equals set interval. And what we want to do is, if the idle counting that we've done so far, if it's now currently, if it's greater than or equal to the session time that we set, which is the 15 minutes, well, in that case, it's going to be 1 minute, but you know what I'm talking about. Then we want to show the modal, right? So set show modal to true. what do we do once we show the modal? We then want to set another timeout. Not a timeout. Yeah, it's a timeout. And we want to assign that over to the timeout int. So timeout int equals, and then here we want to set show modal false, because once that timeout hits, we're about to basically log you out. So, and what we want to do is log you out. And we don't have a method for log you out yet, but what I could do is set the session to null on the user. Actually, you know what? I can set the session to null on the user and the logout. All right, so let's put a method in here. So let's call it well, let's make an async function. And call it logout. And I know I'm probably going to be calling the same place multiple times. Let me async function make session call. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just put in a generic method here so I can call this from both places. So now here, what I can do is I can do await make session call, and then pass in the where I wanted to log out. And of course, you remember you already have a log out. All right, and we can actually constant response result equals if result not status equals 200, then set. Or do we even care? Should we just log you out regardless, right? Like, do we even care that you are it fails when it goes to log you out, right? Maybe we don't care. Yeah, so maybe we don't care. So I'll just set the session set user to null. All right, cool. So what do we want to do here? So in this, we want to return await fetch whatever API is passed in. We know the method is going to be a post method. Aside from that, we don't really need anything else except headers. So, and our usual header accept application JSON and content type application JSON. Let's not forget our comma here, and I think that should pretty much sort of do it. We got our cleanup, so let's actually call cleanup here. Yep. So that logs you out. So we need one more method for keeping a session. So let's call async function. And of course, it makes sense to call it keep session. Here, everyone would probably do the same thing, right? So result equals, probably should have just copied this thing because it's almost the same thing. Take this, change that name, and we can remove this part. Except here, we're not going to go to, I'm going to go to refresh. Now, we don't have that endpoint yet, but we can create it in a few minutes. So here, this, we actually do care to make sure that it is status. So if result dot status equals 200, then we want to set this. Move that up. And we don't want to set this to null. We want to await result dot JSON. And we don't need cleanup here. Actually, don't we need cleanup? Let me see. What are we doing in cleanup? We are resetting set mode to full. Clear. Actually, we can just call cleanup too. That'll work fine. That would be fine. All right. So that's that. At least I think that's all the mess that we need, right? Because let's come back in here. All right. So what do you want to do? So let's finish this place up. So here we want to await. If we're only going to come in here if the user has waited the 2 minutes and basically hasn't done anything, right? So if they've waited this time and didn't done nothing, then just log them out. At this point, we don't really care about anything else. Now for the timeout, we say we want to wait 2 minutes. So what do we call that one? Response time, modal response time. Modal response time. For the interval, oh, actually, you know what? Since this is going to be an async, let's go ahead and turn that into an async. Let's see. So the session time, where's the timer? That ends right here. All right. So we're saying that session interval. We're going to keep checking the interval idle check time. Oops, not that. We want the idle check up. All right, cool. So if the counter has reached that or else, we want to continue counting, right? So that we want to say outer counter keep counting. So we want to count how much more to it. Basically the same thing here, right? We want to count 30 more seconds to that. Yep. There's a bit of a flaw right here, and that's what I was talking about earlier, but I'll come back to that in a minute. I think that's all we need. Let's now put in our modal code. So for the modal, I'm just going to use bootstrap modal. All right, let's go ahead and grab a bootstrap modal. So you want a modal. Let's find the simplest modal we can find here. Let's maybe one with a backdrop. It's not a backdrop. That's good enough. That should be simple enough. Let's store it down here somewhere. All right, so the biggest things we have to do is make, Bootstrap typically uses, not typically, Bootstrap uses jQuery for a lot of the toggling and stuff like that. So all the interactivity that it does. So what we're going to do is update that here. So we're going to need a style. So let's open up a style brackets here, and all we need is really just show. And it's really just going to be one thing, right? Display block. Oh, thank you, IntelliSense. All right, so what do we need to show here? This is one of the things I actually do like a lot about Svelte in general. Is the way that you can just add class. So the syntax here is class, and then whatever class you want to add. In this case, the class is show, and we want to show when what? Show modal, right? So when show modal, that's going to apply to this, and that's going to raise the modal. Aerial hidden, right now it's set to true. So let's go ahead and update that piece too. We can do user ternary for this part. So we will say if show modal, right, then false. Otherwise, I guess I'm gonna bring this here. And just because it's, maybe I just do. Don't really have to do anything else here. But in terms of styling, obviously you can play around and do stuff. That's not what we're here for. Let's call this simply attention. And the buttons. Now this button here, let's put an X or something. All right, what do we need? What else do we need? Let's give the user some information like your session is about to expire or something like that. Wow, that's a long message. All right, so click that to stay logged in. Otherwise, you'll be logged out. All right, simple enough. All right, now here comes the magic. So on click, what do we want to do? So on click, we want to log out because the user has decided that they want to log out. In fact, we can and we said to click keep session. So let's go ahead and change that. So let me pull this down just a little bit. So on click on this one though, we want to say keep session because I think that's the name of the method we wrote. All right, that should be good enough. What I'm not gonna have is patience to wait for this. So what I'm actually gonna do is let me do something here. Let me steal a button right here. And this is probably gonna look ugly, but that's fine because I'm not gonna have the patience to be waiting a whole minute just for the thing to come up. So what I'll do is I'll put a button here and on click, let's call this button yes. I'll put that there. What I'll do is that on click, I'll raise the modal myself. So on click, on click show modal equals not show modal. Just so I don't have to keep waiting for it to show up. And let's go and grab this and throw that in here. Of course, you wouldn't want to do this, but for our purpose, we want to be able to test it right away. Let's go ahead and create the refresh endpoint. So come in here, call it refresh.js. And in fact, it's going to look probably just like the logout. So let's go ahead and copy the logout piece and remove things we don't want. So stuff we need, the usual, right? The create request, which takes in request, response, and nest. Endpoint, and of course the user as well. So here, the only difference is that endpoint is not going to be logout. Endpoint is going to be refresh token. Refresh token. It's going to be a post. Going to also require the header. Content type is still the same. This is the same. We won't allow you to obviously refresh without having the token. So we want to keep this. We won't allow you to refresh without having the refresh token. So again, keep that. So make the request. The only exception here is that we're not going to delete this, right? Instead, we're going to set it. So here, I guess what we can do is we can say refreshed session. Set content header. And here we do want to return it back. So JSON.stringify. So JSON.stringify the data. Excuse me. And if not, then we'll just do the same as usual. So pretty much just like the logout, minus of course the fact that we're not actually going to delete the session and things like that. All right, so now we need to go back to our .NET Core API and make sure that the refresh endpoint is good to go. All right, have a breakpoint over here. So the refresh token, the endpoint is at refresh token. What we're going to do is going to be looking for a header called refresh auth, refresh token header. Right. So once it's in there, we'll look for it. If it doesn't exist, we will return a unauthorized. If the refresh token does exist, we'll go ahead and do our usual refresh token stuff that we've been doing. Come back, get a result, and return a result. So I think that should be pretty straightforward. So let's actually run this application. If you run into any issue where the header is not populating, just make sure that you add this refresh token on the list of exposed headers. All right, so our API is running. Now what we need to do is we need to head over to our nav and bring in that track session, and we can just do it somewhere in here. Nav, just do it on the bottom here, that's fine. So it's called track session. And I believe IntelliSense brought it in for me. Beautiful. All right, everything built. Let's go take a look at our code. And here's our ugly button, but for now we'll just keep it there because, you know, we need it. All right, so let's go ahead and log in. All right, as you can see, we are officially logged in. We got routed to the dashboard. We have token, we have refresh token, authenticated is called true. So let's click yes. And let's go see, our modal didn't come up. Oh, I didn't realize I didn't completely update this. That's that was silly of me. Right. So update that into an actual method there. And as you can see, this is working, right? So at component is being destroyed, users being added to section, component is being destroyed. All right, so let's try that again. There it is. All right. All right, so the first thing we want to do is the easiest path, which is to log out. That should just work because we've been logging out, right? Log in. All right, so we are here. Is there a refresh token? There is one. All right. Is it valid? It seems to be valid. All right. I'm gonna let that go. And there we go. Perfect. All right, so that's all there is to it. As I mentioned before, one other thing that you may want to keep in mind is that if the user continues to click on the page, right, what's going to happen eventually is that your user may become logged out by the session token on the API, because the API gives the user about 15 minutes or something, right? You may want to, you know, lengthen this a little bit more, but essentially what's going to happen is that they're going to be out of sync. So the user session, or specifically the user's JWT token, is going to expire, but the user on the front end is going to assume that the session is still alive, when that's not really the case. So what you want to do is that regardless of whether the user keeps clicking or doesn't click, you want to keep another variable here. And what's going to happen is that what you would do is you would check to see if this session here is, you check this first, and then you check to see else if, have we actually met up to like the maximum time. If you've met up to the maximum time, don't just go and increment this. What you want to do then is you want to make the call to make session or refresh session again. And what that would do is that we refresh this session token, and then you just come back and, you know, reset the item. Well, I'm already telling you everything that you need to do, but that's something that you should probably go ahead and play around with, you know, to get more comfortable with this. But from here at this point, you should be able to move forward to JWT in sessions. This is definitely not it's not the easiest thing to do, but it's also not all that complicated. Once you get your head around it, it's just a matter of which route you want to take. There's a million ways to solve the issue, and this is just one of them. All these one that I found to be pretty good. So anyway, this is probably going to be the very last of the very long series that we have. Everything else moving forward would just be a little bit shorter because we no longer need to spend so much time on authentication. Authentication is usually the piece that you want to get right, because once you get it right, everything else flows in. Everything else we have left is mostly CRUD operations and a few, a little bit logic here and there. I may take a little bit of a break just to do some other stuff and put this one aside for a second. But at this point, you can take this sort of framework, build upon it, fix some of the pieces that we just talked about, make some of the codes a bit more generic. As you see, there's a lot of times where we add in, accept this, and you may want to make an even more generic API than the one we made before. So just a little bit of stuff like that. Those things will help you clean up the code a bit more, so you don't have a bunch of duplicated code in different places. Anyway, that's going to be it. As usual, if you find this helpful, definitely make sure that you subscribe, share, let other people know about this content so they can, the channel can grow and people can know more about it. All right. Peace.